Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, welcome to Today in Black History. I'm Alicia Melton. Each week, I highlight a Black American achievement or a historical event. And today, we're going to talk about Margaret Walker. She was a poet, author, professor, and contributed significantly to American literature. Today, I have a special guest, Mr. Lance Wheeler from from the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. So I am going to uh, bring him in. Waiting for him. Um, if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section. Good morning, Mr. Wheeler. How are you?
Good morning. How you doing, Miss Milton?
I'm doing well. So those of you who just joined us, I'm Juice and Miami Gardens Now. We have Mr. Lance Wheeler from Jackson State University. I'm going to read his bio in a few minutes, but we're talking about Margaret Walker, and she was an author, poet, and he's going to talk about her life and her legacy. But I'm just going to briefly mention do a formal introduction. So Lance Wheeler currently serves as the Education and Public Relations Manager for the Margaret Walker Center and Council of Federated Organization Education Center at Jackson State University, located in Jackson, Mississippi. Before starting Margaret Walker Center and the COFO Education Center, Lance served as a curator for two Mississippi museums, beginning his work there before its groundbreaking in December of 2017. Originally from Jersey City, New Jersey, he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Belmont Abbey College and a Master's of Arts degree in history with a concentration in museum studies from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. So welcome to
Thank you.
Today in Black History. All right, so again, everyone, if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section and we will answer them. All right, so let's get started. So we're talking about Margaret Walker today. She was born today, July 7th, 1915, and in Birmingham, Alabama. And her family settled in New Orleans, and she began reading and writing by the age of 5. After she, sorry about that. So she met Langston Hughes.
Mm-hmm.
And after she met Langston Hughes, her writing began to flourish. But what did he tell her what she needed to do to complete her education? He told her that it was important for her to leave the South to complete her education. Can you tell us about her relationship or friendship with Langston Hughes, and why did he advise her to leave the South to complete her education?
First, let me say good morning to you and everybody that's watching today. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation and honoring this dynamic woman. And once again, today is her birthday. She would have been 105 years old today. So happy birthday, Dr. Margaret Walker. And so really quickly, like you just said, what was her relationship with Langston Hughes? And so let me first say that she actually met Langston Hughes at the age of 13. Um, at the University of Dillard University, excuse me, what we call Dillard University in New Orleans. And so her parents are going to say, okay, they're going to kind of force her, persuade her to say, give Langston Hughes some of your writings, right? And so she's hesitant at first. She says she doesn't want to, but her parents ultimately make her do it. He reads her writing. He sees the raw potential behind her, the literary genius that she can possibly be. And so what he does is he he becomes a lifelong friend, but also her mentor, right? He helps her. He starts mentoring her through her writing, and so he's going to be one of the reasons for her and her parents to say, you know, we need you to leave the South to really pursue your education. And I think the obvious reasons for in the South during this time period, right? Um, you have the Jim Crow South. And I believe that they wanted to see beyond the South, the restrictions that were placed on Black people in the South. And also, Langston Hughes helped her get her first poem published in The Crisis, which, if you're aware of The Crisis, W. Boyce was the editor of that during that time period. And she gets her poem published at 19 years old, and this is 1934. And the poem is titled "I Want to Write." And so that's how he gets her early start. This is how he mentors and creates a long time friendship with Margaret Walker.
Okay, thank you. So let me just highlight her education background. So she received her bachelor's from Northwestern University, and then she received her master's and PhD from the University of Iowa. All right, so she moved to Chicago. She was attending Northwestern University, and where I read is that when she moved to Chicago, that's where her talent matured. So tell me about her experience working with the Federal Writers Project and the Southside Writers Group.
So once again, who helps build that connection when she gets to Chicago is Langston Hughes, right? He's gonna help. He's gonna introduce her to the literary geniuses of the Black literary genius of the time period, from the Harlem Renaissance to the Chicago Renaissance, right? So she's gonna meet Richard Wright, who writes Black Boy. She's gonna meet Lorraine Hansberg, who writes Raisin in the Sun. She's gonna meet Zora Neale Hurston, who writes Their Eyes Are Watching God. Frenton Johnson, who writes The Song of the Soil. So she is meeting these phenomenal Black writers and poets at a time where she's actually a generation under them, right? And so being exposed to that and seeing their mind and how they work and how they're working, I think it's life changing for her. And so through those connections, she becomes part of the Federal Works Project. And her assignment is she's going to help create a Illinois guide through the WPA. And so through those relationships, she's going to become what we know who's going to become Margaret Walker, right? And so what's interesting, while working there, she becomes really close to Richard Wright. And they have an interesting relationship themselves.
Okay, that's going to be my next question. So, some of you may know who Richard Wright is. Richard Wright is known for his popular book, Native Son, which was published in 1940. So, yes, please, if you can, tell us about her relationship with Richard Wright.
So when Richard Wright actually leaves Chicago and he goes to New York, she takes over the Southside Writers Group that Richard Wright is in control of during that time period. But I would say their relationship is interesting. Some people also say it's complicated as well. That's because if you have the opportunity and take the time to go through our archives and read her journals, you kind of get an idea that Margaret was kind of in love with Richard Wright. She refers to him as Dickie, because they become really close working on the project in Chicago. But eventually it gets sour, and that's because she's going to actually accuse Richard Wright of plagiarizing of Native Son, taking parts of her unpublished book, and taking it and putting it in parts of Native Son. Because she's actually, before they have that falling out, she's actually typing up the manuscript for Native Son. And so once that happens, it kind of gives her a bad taste about, okay, you're stealing my work, but you're not giving me credit. And so it kind of goes left. And then because of that, she comes out with her own book about Richard Wright, the Dynamic Genius, right? Which is, she talks about his character, being lustful, being conceited, trying to figure out his place in society. And so she writes that, but a lot of critics dismiss that kind of work. And what's ironic, when she writes that book, Ellen Wright, who's the wife of Richard Wright, is going to actually attempt to sue Margaret Walker, saying it is not a biography So the case is Wright versus Warner's, right? Books. But she wins the case. And so it doesn't go anywhere. But it's their relationship was interesting and best.
Wow. All right. Interesting. So now she's known for writing many books, but I'm going to focus on two that is really popular. And the first one we're going to talk about is For My People, which was published in 1942.
Mhm.
Tell me, what is this book about and why is it so popular?
So, so for my people is also a book, and it also is a poem, right? And so for me, if you read the poem for my people and look how she wrote it, it's the trend. You see the evolution of Black people through America, right? She starts through slavery, then she talks about Jim Crow, and then she's gonna say the next generation of people are gonna bring change, being Black people. And if you read it, you can tell she uses lack of commas, which tells the reader, what makes it seem like the author and the reader themselves are tired of the pain and struggle that our people are going through. But ultimately, you see that our people are have hope. Uh, we are God fearing. We are overcomers. And so for me, I think that's why the work is important. And you mentioned it came out in 1942. And so she actually submitted that poem, that piece to Young Poet Awards or Yale Series of Young Poets, which is an annual event sponsored by Yale University's Press. And it's been around since 1918. And it's the longest running literary event in the country. And it's honestly the prestigious award that you can get as a poet. And so she's going to be the first African American to win that award in 1942 for my people. And she's also going to use For My People as her MA dissertation as well.
Okay. So I just want to let everyone who just joined, we're talking about Margaret Walker with Mr. Lance Wheeler from the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. And again, if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section. Thank you. All right. So the next uh, book we want to talk about is Jubilee, which is very popular. And that was published in 1966.
Mhm.
And she also used this as her doctoral dissertation as well. I read some of the reviews, and what I saw in one literary review, it said that this novel was known as the first truly historical Black American novel.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
So it's also considered to be the first neo-slave narrative or a neo-slave novel. And so what's interesting how she writes it in 1966, but when she was in New Orleans growing up as a child, she had the privilege to be with her great grandmother and her grandmother. And so they are sharing memories of their lives from slavery to freedom. All right. And so you actually see in the intro of the book, she talks about her real great grandmother going through child labor, giving birth to a child and she died. That was hers, but it was she was the baby was a product of rape, right? And so her rapist, which we call masters, but we're going to use the word rapist to describe this because that's what happened. She dies, and so she paints that picture of blackness at a very pivotal point. And so if you look at the historical context when she's writing this in 1966, she's in Jackson, Mississippi, and this is a black woman writing this beautiful work. But if we take a step back and look historically what's going on in Mississippi, you have the civil rights movement, right? You have the Freedom Riders coming in '61. You have the death of Medgar Evers in '63, which Medgar Evers is actually her neighbor. They lived on the same street. And then in '64, you have Freedom Summer, right? And so
Mhm.
for this woman to write this and put that in the context of where she's at currently in this country in the '60s, it's phenomenal. And that's why it's one of her amazing works.
Okay. Now, I also read up on something that was very interesting, and this is about Alex Haley, and it's almost something similar to what you just mentioned about Richard Wright. So, tell us about this lawsuit that she filed against Alex Haley. And if
What's
those of you, Alex Haley is he wrote the biography of Malcolm X, and also we know him for the miniseries Roots. So go ahead and
mhm.
share that story.
And what's interesting is, and you see here that the closest people have been taking her work, right, and plagiarizing them. And so Jubilee came out in '66, Roots came out in 1976, right? And they were very good friends. And so what happens, Alex Haley actually plagiarized parts from Jubilee and puts them into Roots. So she's going to actually sue him, but unfortunately she doesn't win. That's because Alex Haley had enough he had enough money to back lawyers. He had better lawyers than her, and so it goes unanswered. But what's interesting, later on, he does have to uh, give out money for Roots because he did plagiarize parts of Roots to other people. But unfortunately, she was not able to win her case. But if you know the author and poet um, Amiri Baraka.
Hmm.
He was a good friend of Margaret Walker, and so when he used to visit her house in the foyer area in her home, she had a book of Roots on one side and a book of Jubilee on the other side, and she highlighted the parts that Alex Haley actually plagiarized from Jubilee. And so if you actually go back and read Roots and read Jubilee, you can actually see that he did take things from her. And
Wow.
so that was that relationship. Once again, she was good friends with Alex Haley. He plagiarized stuff from her. She was good friends with Richard Wright, and she was plagiarizing stuff from her as well. And so you kind of see that pattern throughout her life, which is unfortunate.
Mm. All right, so then let's talk about, since we're talking about her friends, let's talk about some of her mentors and also some of the poets and writers she mentored, because this is very interesting. Yeah, go ahead and talk about
So,
her mentors.
so some of her mentors, once again, is Langston Hughes. And at the same time, Richard Wright is one of her mentors early on as well. You have Sterling A. Brown, say Clark Drake, and then you have like many others that she is being mentored by. And these are some of the great minds of the early part of the century, right? And so she's being mentored within it, and they become family as well. And so then her mentees, and so this is when I usually tell people the people that I'm going to name are usually other people's favorite, right? So like her mentees are Nikki Giovanni, Cyan Sanchez, Alex Walker, Haki Madhubuti, right? Paul Gideon, Kisei Layman, right? These are all phenomenal authors, and when we tell people, to me, Margaret Walker is like an unsung hero because she's your favorite author's favorite, right? I'll give you an example. We hosted last year in Jackson, Mississippi, AAAM, which is the Association of African American Museums, right? We had a conference here. And so one of our guest speakers for the event was Cyan Sanchez. And so my boss, Dr. Robbie Luckett, Cyan Sanchez asked Robbie, she said, can you please take me to the Margaret Walker house? He said, sure. So he actually takes her to the home and she gets out the car and has a moment, right? And she talks about how this phenomenal woman was one of the best people that you can ever meet. She was intelligent, she was sweet, she played no games, and she knew how to cook amazingly, right? And so she was a love and warming person. And same thing with Nikki Giovanni. Nikki Giovanni just recently did a virtual conversation, and she talked about Margaret Walker and being phenomenal, and also then being an amazing cook. And so once again, it's important for people to realize that she's your favorite author's favorite. And so
Hmm.
I'm happy that we're having this conversation about who she is and her legacy.
I'm reading some of the comments, and if you want to and feel comfortable talking about this, but in the comments there is a conversation about sexism,
Yeah.
um, and that these were men, and thinking of the time, do you think that also, besides the money, you said Alex Haley had the money to fight her in court, but what do you think about sexism.
Misogyny was a real thing for her. She even experienced this at Jackson State as a woman, right? Which is an HBCU, and it's sad to say during this time period, she was taken advantage of because she was a woman, right? No, even how brilliant she was, and this is when when I used to work at the Civil Rights Museum. I always said, yeah, men were physically in the forefront, but the women were the backbone, and they are the movement, right? Black women have for the longest have always been the movement itself. It's unfortunately that she experienced that. And also, I also tell people, put in context, she also even how amazing she is as an author and poet, and because that's what you see the gap right between Jubilee and For My People. She's writing other pieces, but she wants to be. She's always stayed true to herself, and it's unfortunate that she was once again taken advantage of by men.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned Jackson State University. Tell us about her experience at Jackson State University as a professor.
Okay, so she was an English professor there. She worked at Jackson State from 1949 to 1979, for that's 30 years. Um, excuse me. She was loved once again by her students. But they all said she did not play games. She took education serious, and she pushed them. She pushed them to be their best. For example, P.S.A. Lehman, he writes heavy, and he talks about how just being in her presence, you felt among a giant, right? But you understood the power behind her, but she was still also a beautiful, sweet woman. But when she was writing, when she was teaching, it was no game. This was a serious thing for us to do. And so that was her experience. But also at Jackson State, like I said, she experienced misogyny as well, just as racism as a woman during this time period. Later on, she's gonna create the Institute for Study of History and Life and Culture of Black People in 1968, which is important. And I'll say that again slower. She created the Institution of the Study of History and Life and Culture of Black People. So historically, if we put that in context, what happened in 1968? Dr. King is actually assassinated April 4th, 1968. And so this Black woman is creating a program an institution, I should say, to preserve, interpret, and be proactive of Black life as a whole, not just in the South, but as a whole. And so that is powerful in itself. Then as a Black woman, she is one of the founding individuals to push the Black Studies movement, right? She's going to help push that into our century, into the 60s and 70s. And so she's going to actually host one of the first conferences in 1971 called the National Inventive Conference, looking at the Black Studies and groundbreaking. Then she's also going to do another festival in 1973, the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, with other 30 Black amazing women across the world, honoring the Bicentennial Weekly's book, Poem of Various Religions and Morals. And so she is, once again, an unsung hero who's done all this that we are celebrating today. And so that was her experience on Jackson State. She's going to actually retire in 1979, and the Institution of Black Studies is going to be renamed after her. And so that's why we call it the Margaret Walker Center today.
Okay, and just want to just add to that, what you were saying, what was happening in the late 1960s were this emergence of all these African American or Black studies departments and programs were popping up at a lot of these universities. So yes. All right, and so let's talk about the Margaret Walker Center. What do you do there? What are some of your services and your programs?
We continue the same legacy that Margaret Walker started before she retired. Our job is to preserve, interpret, and share the history of Black life and Black individuals within Jackson, Mississippi, within Mississippi, but also just in general. That's our core. And so we also believe in community, right? How do we help and serve our community? What do we need? What can we provide? And I think it's interesting. A lot of museums always tend to say, we have the tangible object. I believe at the Margaret Walker Center, our people are the tangible thing, right? Your stories, your voice, you matter. So community is what we do at the Margaret Walker Center. And so some of the programs that we've been doing this year with the COVID, we, of course, a lot of us had to go, all of us is virtual, but we hosted a virtual conversation because in 1960, I'm not sure if you're aware, the Gibbs and Green shooting that took place on Jackson State campus, two Black students were assassinated by the Jackson Police Department and the Highway Patrolmen. And so this will have been their anniversary this year, and we're going to actually have a commencement, but COVID happened. And so we're going to try to do a commencement for them in this December. But we had a conversation with the loved ones of students who actually remember Gibbs and Green, family members who were affected. And so that was that conversation. We are working with a company called a screening called Girl Justice with the Justice Lab, and it looks at how Black women who are gay, transgender, runaways, teenagers, and how they are put in the system and how they are quickly judged. And we're going to be working with JSU Girl to do that screening on campus. We are also hosting a program this evening called Cooking with Margaret. And so Margaret wasn't just a poet, wasn't just an author or a writer. She was also a human being, right? She loved to cook. She loved to throw parties, right? So once again, she had some of the great people at her house, like James Baldwin, the Evers. And so we're actually going to use one of her recipes this evening, 6 o'clock Central Time, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, using a recipe that she used to celebrate her birthday today. And so those are the kind of programs that we're doing right now. And then also at the Margaret Walker Center, we have made a social stance, right? We want to be on the right side of history, and we believe that museums are not neutral, right? And so we have made this decision to constantly support our local activist groups, organizations that are pushing for change. And so that's what we do at the Margaret Walker Center.
All right, good. I want to go back and talk about one of her poems, Micah. Tell us about Micah.
Okay, so Micah is actually one of my favorite poems from Margaret Walker. Micah can be found in the poetry Prophets of the New Day, where she compares civil rights activists and martyrs to biblical prophets, right? And so, if I could, can I read Micah? It's real short.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to read it. And I want to see if people can guess who she's talking about. Excuse me. Micah was a young man of the people who came from the streets of Mississippi and cried out his vision to his people, who stood fearless before the waiting throngs. As an astronaut shooting into space, Micah was a man who spoke against oppression, crying woes to your workers in inequity, crying woes to the doers of violence, crying woes to the breakers of the peace, crying woes to you, my enemy. For when I fall, I shall rise, death with dedication. When I stagger under the wound of your paid assassins, I shall be whole again and death triumph, right? For your rich men are full of violence, and your mayors of your city speaks lies. They are full of deceit. We do not fear them. They shall not enter the city of goodwill. We shall dwell under our own vine and fig trees in peace, and they shall not be remembered in the book of life. Micah was a man. So who do y'all think that was? Who did she
let
talking
us know in the
about?
comments. Mm-hmm. Let us know in the comments. Mr. Wheeler just read Micah.
And so Micah in the Bible means who was like the Lord, right? And so Micah condemns injustice that take place during biblical times. And so I see EBB S97 said it. She said it, she quite a question mark. And yes, it's Medgar Evers. She is talking about Medgar Evers. And so
All
that's who
right.
Micah is for her during that time period. He did take a stance against injustice. He was using his voice. And so ultimately it cost him his life. But once again, if you go to the Medgar Evers house, which is a national historical landmark, you walk down the block, excuse me, Miss Margaret Walker's house is down the block as well. And so she knew him personally.
Wow. Okay. And so, can you talk about her home
Yeah.
and where it is?
So her home is well, the street at one point was called Guinea Street, right? Now the block is called is named after Margaret Walker. And like I just said a few seconds ago, the Medgar and Murray Evers house is a national landmark, right? Which is amazing, which took a long time for it to be a national, which it should have happened quicker. But unfortunately, Marcus House is not a national landmark, right? Um, and it needs to be. The house is actually um, falling apart. And I
Mm,
find it interesting when Black spaces are falling apart. It's hard for people, Black people, to try to get it preserved, right? But it's easy for white spaces historically to be preserved. And so I think us having this conversation today shows how why she's important, and hopefully can get us on the right track of preserving her home and legacy, right? Because once again, if you have the great Black literary minds of the century in that home, that's a reason to preserve it, right? But
mm.
also because of who she was as an individual.
All right. Thank you. So those of you who just joined us or joined us later, we're talking about Margaret Walker, and we have Mr. Lance Wheeler here from the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. And so if you have any questions, please post them in the comments. And thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the love. Thank you so much for that. And I see some of your comments where you're saying we have to take charge of our own destiny. Yes, it's all about preserving the information, but also letting it be accessible and having conversations like this. Um, I see KPC's comment. Meanwhile, they are protecting the hell out of monuments to slavery. Yes, and actually, those monuments is their way of preserving their history. So yes. All right. So please, if you have any questions, I see a comment, Lance. Why made you want? Oh, she wants to know, why did you study history? What made that interesting to you? Why did you become a
Um,
historian?
I'm gonna be honest. I tell people all the time, history is honestly boring, right? When I say history is boring, because we are forced to remember facts and dead white people and dates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Historically, that's how history happens, right? For a lot of us, we tell people we hate history, we dislike it. It's our least favorite subject. But it's once you find yourself into the narrative, usually, which is usually in college, right?
Right.
You enjoy it, you love it then. And then also, that's when we start going through the process of, as a Black individual, who am I as a person, right? Who am
Mm-hmm.
I? Where do I come from? Then that's when we start having the conversations with grandma, grandpa, if they're still around, right? But history becomes fun once you're able to find yourself in the narrative, right?
Right.
And so for me, how I fell into history, I tell people history for me saved my life in the sense of I'm from Jersey City, New Jersey. I'm an inner city kid, right? So statistically, I was not supposed to be here, right? Um, I had friends arrested, friends selling drugs, people locked up. And so when I was able to, and I had a great teacher, her name was Patricia Dello. Once she started to help me find out who I was in the history books, that's when I started enjoying it. And then when I got to college, I got to take my first civil rights course, right? And then I was like, okay. Then when I had a son, I was like, okay, it's my job to know who I am or try to inform who I am so I can teach him how to be a Black boy and how do I raise a Black boy into a Black man, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's why I got into history. And then I tell people, for me, how I piece who I am, I look at Medgar Evers, I look at Malcolm X, I look at James Baldwin, I look at Margaret Walker and say, I may not know them, they may not be related to me by blood, but those are my family, right? And so that's why I study history, and this is why I choose this path. I think if you have an idea of where you come from, you have a better appreciation. So that's why I study history.
Okay. KPZ says, yep, white Judeo-Christian history is boring. Okay. So,
And she's right. She's right. Because if you
mhm,
look at this, if you look at how black people are mentioned in books, it's slavery, it happened. We got freed, Jim Crow, and then Martin Luther King did everything, right? We as people know that there's a lot more players in the story. And Margaret Walker is one of those players in the story. And so I applaud her for saying that statement.
and I also want to mention your favorite Ika, amazing story, brother. I love how your journey has transformed you. Love you, and I'm so proud of you. Thank you for that. All right, so I have another question. Can you talk about your time at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum?
Yes. That was my very first, like, I've been in museums before, but that's like my first real job as a museum professional. And so I was the curator of exhibitions for the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and it was my dream job. I actually came from Jersey to North Carolina where I did all my education, then I came down to Mississippi. It was phenomenal. Being able to be 27 at the time and get to meet civil rights veterans that I got to read about my entire life was a privilege. I had the opportunity to meet Bob Moses and talk to him, Charlie Cobb and talk to him, Miss Murray Evers. But what made the space beautiful was the conversations that I got to have with people on a daily basis, right? I'm a firm believer in making history simple. Like let's have a conversation, because I used to tell people all the time, it's my job to hurt your feelings. And because if you're going to come to this museum and you walk across that line, I'm going to hurt your feelings because at the end of the day, these are the facts. We need to get past it. We need to have a conversation about it. We got to talk about the pain and struggles that we went through as people and also what we've overcome. But then the next conversation is, where do we go from here, right? Which is the last gallery in Gallery 8 in the Civil Rights Museum, which is Dr. King's last book. Where do we go as Black people? Where do we go as people to bring change, to further bring change? And so I always look forward to those conversations. And even though I'm not there anymore, I still consider it my space. I love it. And it's important for civil rights leaders across the country now. Like if you look at the civil rights movement that we're in right now, I think these spaces serve for conversation and resources to be used in today's movement.
Okay. And is there anything else you want to say about Margaret Walker? Today we're celebrating her 105th birthday.
I'm going to say, if you have not read any of her works, read her work. Start with For My People. It will change you. It will make you think a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to say, if you have time, and we have plenty of time with COVID, read Jubilee. Jubilee's a thick book now, but but read it. And read some of her other poems, like Dark Blood. She writes a poem about the Greensboro sit-in. She has a phenomenal works. And so I'm going to recommend, if you're going to get the books, it's called This Is My Century, New and Collected Poems of Margaret Walker, and it has all her poems in there that I'm talking about. And also please tune in this evening at Jackson State's Facebook page to watch the cooking segment to learn more about who she is as an individual.
Okay. I know your favorite. She just asked some questions about resources. So you just gave some books about Margaret Walker, but I think she also wants to know, where do you start just to learn about Black history, if you have any?
So that's a good question. I tell people, if you have the privilege, you talk to the oldest person in your family, that if you're Black.
Mhm.
And I know sometimes when we're young, okay, grandma, you're telling me the same story, blah blah blah. But then we get old, grandma's gone. We're like, okay, who am I? But
Right.
I think if you have the opportunity, just sit down and talk to the oldest person in your family to say, who are you and who am I? Right? Where do we come from? And I think that's the first part of the conversation, right? And then you go to if you're fortunate to have a museum in your area that focus on Black history, that's another start, right? So now you know who you are regionally in your area. But there's great resources. I'm going to talk about the Margaret Walker Center, for example. One of my colleague, Alicia Wright, who's our oral historian, has created a phenomenal anti-resource list, right? Just to get the conversation started on how do you practice that. And so if you go to our Margaret Walker page and go under news, you can see that. But it really starts with a conversation about who you are with your family members, and then go to your local library, do some research. We have Google, we have computers to really start that search. But that would be that would how I would say get started. Talk to your oldest person in your family. You will appreciate it, and they will appreciate you recognizing them and understanding their worth. Because eventually we all get old, and then we want people to remember who we are, and so start that conversation. And yes, and someone said it, seek your local archives for Black history. Phenomenal. I agree with that as well.
Okay. And so, how can we follow you on social media? What's your website?
Okay. So on Facebook, our you can look up Margaret Walker Center, easy. Instagram is M Walker Center. Twitter is M Walker Center as well. And then for our website, you go to the margaretwalkercenter.jsu.ms. No, excuse me, margaretwalkerjsums.edu, and that could take you directly to our website. And so I think also somebody asked me how can they watch the program this evening. If you go
Hmm.
to Jackson State University's Facebook page this evening, if you're on the Central Time, it is 6 p.m. And if you're on the East Coast time, it's going to be at 7 p.m. And so we're going to go live from Facebook on the Jackson State web page.
Wow. And I'm going to read E.B. Queen. She says, good advice, African proverb. When an elder dies, it's like a library burning down.
I'm
Thank
going
you,
to have to take
E.B.
that. I
Queen.
like that. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Um, Also, someone asked, how can they stay connected with you, Lance?
You can just look me up on Instagram, Lance Wheeler. Same thing as Facebook, Lance Wheeler, Wheeler. And if you have any questions, DM me. I'll talk to anybody about history any day. It's a conversation. And so, and also, a great resource for anything else is the Association of African American Museums, right? I know both
Hmm.
our organizations, we're members.
Right.
And so that they have great resources as well.
All right. Thank you, Glass House Miami, for posting the website to the Margaret Walker Center. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I'm terrible at multitasking. Thank you. I was trying to write down this quote. That was good.
Yeah, I like that quote too. All right. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for being here and sharing that information, the life about Margaret Walker, and everyone who, also those of you who joined us this morning. Thank you so much for being here with us. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off.
Thank
Um,
you.
if there's any, KPC just posted, I think, the Black Museum's website as well. Um, Let me read this comment. I think E.B. Queen. Last year I visited the center while attending the AAA conference. While exiting the bus, I noticed a street sign saying Lynch
Okay,
Street.
let me clarify
Okay.
that. So Lynch is not named after a white man. It's actually named after John R. Lynch, and he's going to be coming from Mississippi, right? And so John R. Lynch is actually the first. He's one of the first black representatives to be in government from the state of Mississippi legislature, right? House of Representatives. And so that's why it's named John R. Lynch Street. Fun fact before I get off, Two of the first black senators come from U.S. senators come from Mississippi. You have Hiram Revels, which is Alcorn University. He's going to become the president of Alcorn University. He serves one term. And then you have Kessel Bruce, who's going to actually serve the full term as the U.S. senator. So John R. Lynch Street, look him up. Please look him up. It's not named after what you think it was.
Thanks for the clarification. All right. Okay, so I'm just looking to make sure we didn't miss any questions. Thank you, all of you, for engaging in this conversation. All right. So
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this. I'm enjoying the work that you all are doing. Your virtual programs and conversations are phenomenal. So please follow them as well if you're not following them.
Okay. All right. So everyone, we're going to sign off. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Tomorrow is Jeopardy Noir, a Black History Trivia, and that's at 2 p.m. So thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.